In Genesis 4:13 and 14, we have Cain responding to the judgment against him. And in verse 13 it says,
And Cain said unto the Lord,
My punishment is greater than I can bear.
and concerning this, Skinner says, so the plea of Cain is understood by all modern authorities. The older rendering, my guilt is too great to be forgiven, which is in some ways preferable, is abandoned because the sequel shows that Cain's reflections run on the thought of suffering and not of sin. And Dillman says on this, my punishment is too great for carrying, that is, greater than I could bear. He says, it lies as a heavy burden on the sinner to carry it, that is to say, to endure the punishment of it. The explanation, my fault is too great for pardon, that is, greater than may be forgiven, is indeed grammatically quite as possible, but yet not suitable, because Cain, verse 14, speaks of his punishment and dwells on its greatness only in order to obtain mitigation. So says Noble. So in Genesis 4:13, it could read as represented in the King James here. Or it could be, and Cain said unto the Lord, my fault is too great for pardon. Now, Dillman, Skinner, and others warn that most all scholars go with the way it's represented in the King James. Well, I shouldn't put it that way. Well, Skinner and Dillman point out that there are two possible translations of this, but they give a reason for preferring the one translation over the other. They think that as Cain goes on here, his concern is with his own fate and not with sin. However, I just don't know about that. Check this out. If it says, my fault is too great for pardon, behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the ground, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the land, in the eretz, and it shall come to pass that every one that findeth me shall slay me. There's a lot more going on here, I think, than Dillman and Skinner recognize. There was a very supernatural axis mundi not long ago when this is being uttered by Cain here. And his father knew all about it. And other people knew all about it. And we know from the her seed utterance in chapter 3 that we're looking for one to restore things, and Cain is to be it. But you know how the sacrifices went and what Cain thought. And we end up at this point, and with Cain being cursed by God and losing the chance to restore the axis mundi, the other people are going to want to kill him. Let me see here. So earlier in verse 11, when God is cursing Cain,
And now art thou cursed from the earth, which hath opened her mouth to receive thy brother's blood from thy hand. When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth.
in verse 11, when God says, "And now art thou cursed from the ground," this meant to Cain that he could no longer remain where he was. And I believe that essentially where he was the Kidron Valley. It's the land out to the east of Jerusalem, and there's a brook that runs through the middle of it. And I think that's where he was. That's where he lived. And he interpreted God's curse as him to be banished from the area. Because he says,
My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, thou hast driven me out this day from the face of the earth, and from thy face shall I be hid, and I shall be a fugitive and a vagabond in the earth.
I believe it's Dillman that makes a pertinent remark at this point. Dillman puts it this way. Cain says, Behold, thou hast driven me away by thy sentence. That is, thou drivest me away this day from the surface of the cultivated land, which I have hitherto tilled in Eden. And from thy face shall I be hid, that is, withdrawn from thy view, or even must I hide myself, that is, may appear no more before thee, and shall be unsettled and fugitive. I like how Dillman sees it here. He sees Cain as not only losing the ability to cultivate this ground, but being chased away from it. And I don't know that God's curse says that, but that seems to be how Cain understands it. Or the fact that he can't grow anymore there means he's going to have to go around and find work to eat. That could be the meaning. But Cain understands the implications of this to be that he'll be a wanderer and a vagabond, and that's in the curse as well in verse 12.
When thou tillest the ground, it shall not henceforth yield unto thee her strength. A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth.
As if to say Cain's loss of his ability to feed himself here is going to cause him to have to wander. It's going to push him away from the region he lives in. And that would be the Kidron Valley.
A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth.
A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the land. The land of Eden. This is the use of eretz. And in the portions of the narrative in green on that one illustration that I've sent to you, Lane, and I'll put on the screen. Whenever eretz is used there, it means the land of Eden. And wherever eretz is used with a designation attached to it, land of Nod, land of Shinar, then it's a region outside of Eden, outside of Eretz Eden. And that is crucial to understand. And it can be proven absolutely right here. Cain says, my punishment is greater than I can bear. Or, Well, it doesn't matter which way people take it. See, you know what, though, Lane? In this verse 13, if you follow Dillman and Skinner, then we have another verse where Cain is he's complaining. He's like, oh, come on, God, that's a little hard there. That's too hard. You know? Whereas he could be admitting how terrible what it is that he's done, you know? I don't know. But the alternative translation, I think, can be followed, because what he's referring to is he has lost the chance to restore the Axis Mundi, and people are going to want to kill him. And they're not going to pardon this fault. They're going to kill him. You see what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
When he says, oh, my transgression is too great to be pardoned, not to God, it's to people around. They're going to kill him. And that comes up again in verse 14.
Everyone that findeth me shall slay me.
See, his fault is not, it's too great to be pardoned. He's a dead man. He's a dead man walking or something. Like, I think it could have that meaning.
Like it's not just I don't know, I guess did he disobey God? I mean, obviously he kind of did, but like he's more thinking what's going to happen to him there on earth or in the earth. He's thinking about his actual more physical punishment than what a kind of, I guess, spiritual punishment could come of it.
Yeah. So you'll notice in verse 12 then,
A fugitive and a vagabond shalt thou be in the earth.
in the land of Eden. The curse only applies to the land of Eden. And this is proven because in verse 16,
And Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and dwelt in the land of Nod on the east of Eden. And Cain knew his wife, and she conceived and bare Enoch. And he builded a city.
he goes to the land of Nod, a different eretz Nod, and indeed builds a city and thrives. So you can see that in verse 12, Cain has to leave Eretz Eden. So whenever we have the earth coming up in the narratives, I'm going to emphasize that it means the land of Eden. It doesn't mean planet Earth. When we get into the flood narrative, that's important to understand. It's the land of Eden that was flooded by Noah's flood.
I think what's kind of cool with the flood too is it just kind of naturally flows. Like, of course, it's just the land, the earth, because all we're talking about the land here. That's our premise. So it just kind of naturally flows that the flood is going to be located there.
Right. And this is a literal interpretation that's based on a careful understanding of the Hebrew and how it's being used by the author. A lot of people have kind of a knee-jerk reaction when they hear, local flood. Oh, well, that's not what the Bible says. It's like, actually, that is what the Bible says, you know. And this planet Earth stuff isn't what the Bible says.
Put that in your pipe and smoke it.
So people have it a little backwards in their minds. A careful study of the Hebrew reinforces a regional deluge, definitely. And there's other details that reinforce it in the flood story. So we'll get into those. We are right in the area of text that contains the most important argument for the regional locale of all of these events. You know, this Cain being a fugitive and a vagabond in the eretz, and then once he leaves that eretz and goes into eretz nod, then he thrives. This proves the regional aspect of the narrative. Absolutely. Also, right here in this portion of text, we have the mark of Cain, which proves absolutely the pre-Adamite exposition. So right in this portion here, we have two really important things that I have to bring out in the videos. Right here, we have two really important things in my whole exposition, you know.
And believe me, folks, I don't say stuff to shock you. I say what I really believe and what I know. So you better listen to me.